Good morning. Welcome to Wake Up Well. This morning we're continuing considering the theme of persecution as followers of Christ, persecution in the times to come or in the culture in which we find ourselves. And specifically, I'd love us to consider perseverance and persistence through persecution. What does that look like in our daily lives? Our scripture this morning is John 15, verse 18. Clear words of Jesus to us. If the world hates you, remember that it hated me first. The world would love you as one of its own if you belonged to it. But you are no longer part of the world. This is a reoccurring theme all through the scripture. For you are a holy people, a set apart people, a different people, salt and light. You are to be in the world, yet not of it. We are expected to be different. I chose you to come out of the world. Do you remember what I told you? So what might that mean for the times ahead for us? Well, I think a real key thing for us is that we link this statement of Jesus in the context of this passage, John chapter 15, where he first begins to teach his disciples about the vine, about abiding in him, remaining in him, being in close relationship to him. The early church experienced much persecution in their early forming. They were used to it. They had an expectation for it. They also had in place what might help them have perseverance through persecution. They were tight-knit. They operated as a community. They stood with one another. They were a people of prayer. They were a people who relied on the presence and the power of God. And they had an understanding that they would be persecuted. They'd seen it from day one. And I guess in that, I look at it as a people in the early church, and I realize that we can see in those early followers something to be imitated. In later times, it's interesting as you look into the history of it, the early church then developed and persecution became a problem for them. People often ran in different directions at hard times. They disowned Christ, they disowned the community. And then in later times, we see in the New Testament, they wanted to reintegrate back into community. And that caused some problems. How were we going to manage this process as the church? Allow people who'd maybe run away from Christ, run away from community, then integrate back, but learn to come through with resilience. As I look at the world today, I think a key thing for us in leadership, in whatever your context, is learning to be a resilient people. We've found that this year. If previous years were about learning to be vulnerable or authentic, this recent season, and it may not have ended yet, is about learning to persevere. Persevere through disappointment, through whatever life throws at us in our culture and context, through this post-lockdown time. And I often reflect on what makes a resilient leader, which is the same question as to how we might journey through persecution. And it goes right back to the beginning of John 15, where Jesus calls us to remain in the Father. So the question for you and for me on this day is our being with Jesus, being with the Father, able to sustain our doing for or doing with the Father? Do we have enough time with him? When the early church realized that people were fleeing in times of persecution and then wanting to come back and it was chaos, they realized they needed to have rhythms and training, discipleship training with their people, with their communities of faith, so that they could stand through hard times and expect it. But the rhythm looked like this. It was the rhythm for learning to be with God. I'm drawn back to a key scripture with this, Mark 3, verse 14 to 15. Jesus says this, we read this, that he appointed the 12 that they might be with him and that then he might send them out. And it would be a great mistake in this season to focus on the latter part, to be sent out, much as we want to get going and we want to reach our friends and neighbours and we want to even come out of our houses and live life again. to remember the order of things that Jesus consistently always sets for his followers. He appointed the disciples that they might learn to be with him and from there be sent out. So what does it look like for us to constantly remain in him? I think this is a big question. I think rhythms play an important part. So the rhythm of summertime, of having time with Jesus, retreat times, I'd recommend that for everybody. I think we've learned some things as a church through the holy habits. Silence allows for deep reflection, personal understanding, self-awareness, and of course to hear the voice of the Father. So how will you create time, even this August time, to be with the Father? You might be a busy mum, you might be a working professional, and that feels really challenging and a luxury, but I think we will all have time. Sunny summer evenings or early dawn or times on holidays by the seaside that we could choose intentionally to make this our priority, to have that retreat time to be with him. And then there's the everyday, there's the busy times, there's September coming, and it's learning, just like a compass orientates back, to orientate ourselves in the everyday, having pause points throughout the day, allowing for silence, allowing for worship throughout our day, maybe not living at that fast pace that doesn't allow for that reflection, so that we are living from this place of being with him. Our doing overflows, and we can be confident that the life we have, the joy, the peace, the love, can overflow from our lives to others simply because we are being with Jesus. So go think about that for your life, how you might carve that out in the today, orientate like a compass, and in the weeks to come, and be sure to have that time over the summer that in essence you and I would be able to stand to be in this world at such a time as this and be of great blessing to the world around us, and whatever may come, be a people that would be resilient at a time of persecution.